to Father John. Over to you, Father John.
Thank you, Professor Constantine. So the last time I was presenting, I did chapter 2 of my dissertation. I've got 6 chapters. This seminar, like, I'm kind of combining 4, 5, and 6, even a little bit of chapter 3. And so my main theme is talking about, like, so my dissertation is mainly about Pope Matthew I, the 87th Coptic Patriarch. And so my main theme is talking about the influences on the Pope Matthew and how he worked in, like, cohesion with other people rather than just as an individual. So that's kind of like the main theme of this seminar. So just see a picture of the cohesion. And he worked mainly with 3 other personages that I say. And just, it challenged the assumption that Matthew worked in isolation, even though he's the most influential because he's the Pope. And, like, find references of this cohesion from, like, the church documents and church prayers, because they're revered, they're venerated as saints in the Coptic Orthodox Church. And another thing that I really focus on in chapter 5 is the hagiographical impact of all 4 of these personages, not just Matthew. And I argue like 7, 8 points in there, and you can, I'll put that in notes, but I'll talk about that too. And the last chapter is about the burial, where Pope Matthew is buried, his commandment, and why he's buried there, and some of the themes there. And again, coming back to the main point that there was an influence or like a connection, and you see that, and this burial chapter is connected to another personage, and he made it explicit in his commandment, in his will. Okay, so the 3 main influences, I didn't put it in your notes because I kind of just skipped. I skipped just to read the main points in the notes, but the 3 are there. They're called Father Marcus Elantoni. He's kind of like a mentor, a spiritual mentor to Pope Matthew. He was older than him at the time, and he's like he had a big influence. He's called Elantoni because he's from the monastery of Saint Anthony in Egypt. And that's just a picture of him there, and that's where he's buried, in Saint Anthony's monastery in Egypt. That's his burial site, and they made a big church for him. So we're talking about in the 14th century. Father, Hegumen, Father Ibrahim El-Fani. I can't find any picture of him. He's not really in an icon, church Coptic icon, but he also had an influence towards Matthew. He's probably not as recognized as Father Marcus Elantoni, but he's also like, he was a Hegumen, and he had it. And the reason he's called El-Fani, and if you remember from last time, I was talking about how I argue that Pope Matthew is from the monastery of Abu Fana. So that's like the surname of the monastery, El-Fani. So like me, I'm Father John St. Shenouda from the monastery of St. Shenouda. So I put that in there. And that's the other personage, Father Ores, who's not. I guess the main difference is from Abba Ores. We don't really call him Father because he had no ecclesiastical position. He's like a lay urban ascetic. That's probably one of the key differences there. And you can also see in his picture, he has other names, TG, like he referred to himself as the crazy one. I don't think that's in your notes. And Theophanes, manifestation of God. And he was associated with the camel. But again, that's not the point of today. Okay, metaphorically, these 4 personages, they're described by Professor Mark Swanson as orchestra of holiness. So it's kind of like a quartet for four people. They work together and they're combined in church prayers, even though they have some age differences. Marcos was, I think, maybe like 50 years older than him at one stage, than Pope Matthew. So there's certain age gaps, but there was overlap between all four. Their collaboration lasted nearly half a century, strengthening ecclesiastical stability. And the first 8 years of Matthew's papacy, he was a pope for about 30 years. He passed away in 1408, so about 30 years. He started in 1378. So the first 8 years, there's overlap between all four. And Marco Solo Antonio was the first to pass away. Okay, so here's some of the church prayers that show that there's a connection between the other ones. Like, I really wanted to stress this in my notes, that you don't want to just focus on an individual, but rather he worked together in some kind of cohesion. You don't want to get distracted and just focusing on like the one great man, Pope Matthew, and everyone else's background. It's kind of like they really work together. They have converging roles, even though the Pope has the highest ecclesiastical role. And you see that they have lots of significant collaborations. Put that in the end of your notes. But I do a whole comparison in chapter 3 between Pope Matthew I and Abba Ures. So in the church, midnight prayers in the Coptic church, we have, they call it now the commemoration of saints, but the original is like called the litany of the saints. And so that's here, pray to the Lord on our behalf, Abraham, the Higaman, so that's Ibrahim El Fani, and our father Abba Mark El Antoni. So they're together. And just before that is Abba Ures in the Commemoration of the Saints. This is a midnight prayer. It's kind of forms part of it. I mean, it does form part of the liturgy, because in the Coptic Church they have the Vespers, and then traditionally you're supposed to do the midnight prayers, which doesn't always necessarily start at midnight. For example, we in a monastery, we start at 4 a.m. The midnight prayers, and then after that is the matins, and then the liturgy. They're all kind of like combined in the liturgy. So those are the three. I'm not sure why, but Pope Matthew is not in this prayer in the litany of the saints in the midnight Psalmodea, but he is in the liturgy, the complete liturgy of Basil, in the commemoration. So in the Coptic Orthodox Church, there's three main liturgies: Saint Basil, Saint Gregory, and Saint. We call it Saint Cyril, even though Saint Mark wrote pretty much all of it. Saint Cyril just added some things. So in the full Saint Basil liturgy, which most churches don't do, most monasteries don't do, but in the full one, he is there. So you can see, I know it's in Coptic. There's no English version for this. So that's Abba Marcos, for those that have a bit of Coptic ability, because Coptic and Greek are similar. Marcos, it also says where he's from, Antonios, from the monastery of St. Anthony, and also our father, the patriarchist, the patriarch, Abba Matthäus, Pope Matthew, and also Father Abraham, Pihilgomes, the Higaman. And then just one after it, I don't know why there's a saint in between, Tekla Himenot, but one after it is Abba Tiji. That's the other name, one of the names for Abba Ures, to show that there's a connection. And even though this is not prayed that much, like people don't have this book so much in the Orthodox Church, it is in the original church rite. So show that there is a connection between all four personages. And then one other book. There's like one or two I didn't put in the PowerPoint, but you can read it in your notes. In the hymns of praise. So Abu Res is in the hymns of praise. So there it is, a hymn of praise to Saint Res Theophanos. He's got multiple names. You see that it specifically mentions Pope Matthew, the Patriarch, saw you and was amazed at your works, which are extraordinary to all. And it also shows the connection before that. You, meaning Ures, prayed for the captives. One of them was the Patriarch, who delivered him from captivity by your present intercession. So I don't think it's in your notes, but like the Patriarch was in prison, because during this time, it's a tough time for the Copts in Egypt during the Mamluk rule. And the Patriarch was in prison. So was Ures later. And it says like he prayed for him, and there's like some, we believe, like miracle working. That's just to show you like the church, the commemoration of the saints. So we do this every day in the monastery. And it's a long prayer. It's a really long prayer. Just even like skimmed it for you in a short video, and you hear like the sound of what the tune is generally.
Praise the Lord on our behalf, Abba, from human and our Father, Abba, mark that he forgives our sins.
Praise the Lord on our behalf, O chorus of the cross-bearers, perfected in the wilderness, that he may forgive us our sins.
Praise the Lord on my behalf, our Lord King Constantine, and his mother Queen Helen, that he may forgive us our sins.
Praise the Lord on our behalf.
So yeah, the rest, and then the next page you'll see the other two that we mentioned.
O wise Virgin Lady, is the bride of Christ, that he may forgive us our sins.
Praise the Lord on our behalf, saints of this night, each one by his.
So yeah, they're just the that's towards the end of the prayer. Just to show you that they are connected. Okay, so and the other thing that I really try to do in my research is to show that all four hagiographies kind of like had like a common purpose. So I mentioned like 7 points or so. We'll run through this pretty quickly, but they're in your notes in a bit more detail. So I argue that the four hagiographies, they respond to polemic claims. The polemic claims with the Muslims. It's Islam. It's a means to counter anti-Coptic rhetoric during the Mamluk period. These texts helped assert a Coptic identity distinct from the dominant Muslim population, because by the 14th century, it's predominantly Muslim. Maybe at that stage it was like 10% Copts, which is about a similar percentage today. The text sought to reshape external narratives by portraying Copts as devout and righteous rather than opportunistic or weak. Reinforcing communal identity. Like, again, I'm just trying to show that the Copts had identity, and this is found in these hagiographies, like these four hagiographies, not just Pope Matthew's hagiography. And Pope Matthew has his hagiography in the history of the patriarchs. And it showed that they have identity, highlighted themes of holiness, miraculous deeds, and moral superiority, countering claims that Copts converted to Islam out of self-interest, and during this time, because it was a heightened period of persecution for the Copts, many Copts, or at least some Copts, converted to Islam, and some did it out of self-interest, like for financial reasons or positions. This is another point that I try to argue, that spiritual and moral edification, beyond historical documentation, hagiographies served as moral instruction, inspiring believers to emulate the virtues of the saints and reinforcing ideals of piety, asceticism, and faithfulness. Personages like Pope Matthew and the other three were depicted as intercessors who shielded the people from conversion pressures and external threats. So, I mean, it is common in these hagiographies, like they're big on asceticism, they're big on piety. And Pope Matthew, it's not in your notes, but there's many portrayals of him being an intercessor for other people, and also Pope Matthew interceding through other Coptic saints. The Coptic Orthodox Church is very big on saints, and that's, I guess, part of the reason why I think the hagiographies were depicting like that, to show their power. And another common theme is that Pope Matthew and Aberystwyth both had a strong relationship with the Virgin Mary. And that's in my chapter 3 notes. And so I guess you're not going to read about that, but it's showing the connections and showing how they prayed to specific icons. In Cairo, for example, the Church of the Virgin Mary in Harat Zawela, talking about trying to be ordained on the feast days of Saint Mary, and so forth. Another thing that I think Pope Matthew was very big on doing was that he was big on defending the Coptic Church, from a broad perspective. He never really defended himself personally, but he would defend, his church. That was one thing that I think that was significant as well. A few other points that I say. Survival strategy amidst oppression, because the Coptic Church was decreasing in number during this time. Not just the Copts, because in Egypt there was like big times of famine and floods and the plagues in the 14th century, mid 14th century, late 14th century. In a period when the Coptic community faced marginalization and a decline in numbers, these hagiographies depicted the strength and sanctity of Coptic saints as a source of hope and spiritual resilience. Like in the face of martyrdom, because many Copts were martyred during this time. And many Copts denied the faith, some Copts at least. And so that was another big topic, dealing with apostasy. And Pope Matthew, he addresses this topic. It's addressed in his hagiography, and also Marcos and the other two personages. Even though none of the four were martyred, it just says that, for example, Pope Matthew, one stage they were about to kill him. Someone stuck out his sword. He's like, all right, kill me. But then he withdrew, showing like his courage. Loyalty and strategic authority. Pope Matthew's hagiography portrays him as a devoted leader who aided all Egyptians while maintaining strong ties with Christian rulers abroad. His reputation deterred persecution, as seen in his confrontation with Prince Sodom. There are other, princes and other leaders involved, where he subtly invoked foreign Christian support to protect his people. These accounts reinforce Coptic loyalty to Egypt while emphasizing their broader Christian connections. If you read the notes, there's kind of like a section in the history of the patriarchs, which talks about how Pope Matthew is like, look, to like the rulers of Egypt, like the Sultan, look, if you really want to keep going along this persecution, I can refer to like the Franks, to people from Europe, and this is kind of like to show that he can use power elsewhere. I put that in your notes. Might as well read that quote because it's a good quote, I think. So I didn't put the page, but I don't know, like 6th page or something. Matthew confronts Sodom, the prince. He's angered by the prince's mistreatment of Christian women and forcing them to wear, blue garments, and tells him, "But I shall tell you the truth, O Amir, prince. Should you expose one of the girls of my people, I shall not cease to spread devastation and defamation in your country from the limits of Ethiopia and to the ends of Egypt. And I tell you, O prince, that the Christians are not without kings on the earth, and they are not without Christian sultans who observe your sultanate, such as that which you rule over." So like appeal to people outside of Egypt. And the last 2 points that I really stress, and I think they're linked, is the authority and submission, meaning like even though the Muslims are the dominant force during this time, like politically and geographically and like territorially and authoritatively, the Coptic Church has the real power, even though they're the minority. And you see that in the way the hagiographies are written, through like the miracles, the clairvoyance. I mean, that was the bit of the topic of the second speaker, talking about being able to predict the future and that kind of gift. So that's a big theme in not just Pope Matthew, but all 4 hagiographies. Legitimize his leadership and position him as a hidden force behind the throne. Despite outward submission, Matthew influenced political affairs, defended Christian rights, mainly Copts, and resisted unjust rulers. His intercessions and divine support affirmed that God, through the church, remained the ultimate authority over Egypt's fate. And I think these two are linked, showing like the miracles are a source of power. If we believe the miracles are true, then it's a source of power to validate the authority of these saints and validate these hagiographies that they were in control. And even there are miracles attributed to Matthew after he passed away, which I think I put in notes as well. So that's why I think those last 2 points are kind of like my main theme. And again, to repeat, Pope Matthew, he aided all Egyptians, like Muslims, Jews, and this is why in the next section in his funeral, it was attended by a large amount of people, not just Copts. So I'll run through that quickly. This is chapter 6, the last chapter. Pope Matthew explicitly instructed in his will that he be buried as a simple monk, avoiding the luxurious garments usually used for patriarchs. He put that in his will. He requested that his face remain covered during the funeral and that no one be allowed to kiss his feet, emphasizing humility even in death. And the place where he's buried is called the Monastery of Khandak, now known as the Church of Abu-Res. So this is in Cairo in St. Mark's Cathedral in Abyssinia. So this is, you've probably seen a picture of this maybe. It's the Patriarchate. Even though now there is a new cathedral in Alexandria. So St. Mark's body is there. And he put it explicitly by Matthew that he be buried next to Abu-Res. Abu-Res passed away 4 years before him. And so in this St. Mark's Cathedral area, in the monastery of Khandak, as it was known, there is a church. There's many churches, but one of the churches is called Abu-Res, attributed to Abu-Res. And he was the first. Why this is significant? He was the first patriarch to be buried at the monastery of Khandak, which was known at that time, rather than the traditional burial site for patriarchs. And I argue he did this because, out of his humility, he wanted to be buried with the people, like he was a simple person. Because it was called the monastery of Khandak because it was a cemetery for Copts, mainly for lay people. It wasn't meant to be a place for patriarchs, but a few patriarchs followed him after. His funeral was attended by a vast crowd. This is in his hagiography, like not just Copts, Muslims, Jews. His body is carried in a grand procession. His hagiography records miracles, signs following his death, including apparitions. So you can read that in the History of Patriarchs. I guess I got to argue why I think the History of Patriarchs is a good document, but it is taken from manuscript material. That's just a picture of the. So you got the Church of Saint Maurice, which is in this area, and then you go downstairs, like you got the church, there, and you go downstairs, and then Pope Matthew is buried there, and so that's his name, Pope Matthew the First, and then a few other patriarchs followed him, 3 more here, and 1 more patriarch is buried in this area. Again, to show the connection, it's a shared burial site between the two. He was buried adjacent to him, so here is the burial site of Abu Res, who passed away 4 years before him, and there's the picture, the burial site of Pope Matthew is the first one there, showing or reinforcing the deep spiritual bond. This is a close-up of them. Some scholars argue that he desired to bury next to Res as a sign of admiration and friendship, showing the spiritual companionship and association, mutually encouraging each other in the faith. Pope Matthew frequently sought Res prayers, and Res in turn recognized Matthew's holiness. And that's in the History of Patriarchs and other sources. And to show you the icon.
Sorry to interrupt
I know it's 25 minutes. I know
Father John.
25 minutes. I know, yes. Last slide.
Okay, no worries. Great. Thank you.
In Coptic iconography, Pope Matthew is never depicted alone. So here's a picture of them two together. That miracle is in your notes. Res is sometimes depicted alone, but Matthew is always showing a connection with him, emphasizing that, being there together. There's another miracle there. And that's when, as I said, you go downstairs. That's a picture of Saint Res. You go downstairs, that's where he's buried. That's just the praise for Saint Res. And that's just another icon we mentioned there. Oh, yeah, we mentioned here they had a connection between Saint Mary. So this is why they have the Coptic Church have icon like Saint Mary, saying it was like prophesied that Abu Res knew his day, and the Virgin Mary took him just like Pope Matthew. That's really about it.
Great. Thanks so much, Father John. I always find it so fascinating to hear about your research, because it's really an area that I know virtually nothing about. So it's really quite fascinating. We've got some time for questions and comments.
Thank you for your presentation. It's interesting to hear the latest development. I remember back from maybe it may have been the first presentation I heard from you. You were translating a document, I think, the life of Saint Anba Ruiz. Is that correct? Was that translation work you had done initially?
Yeah. So both Abu Res and Pope Matthew, it was a different. So it was a manuscript on both of them, Life and Miracles.
Okay. My question was just, did you find any connection, any support from that work that helped you with this? Was there any connection between those two at all?
Yeah, so sometimes in the manuscript, for example, or manuscripts and other documents, there is information that's not, for example, in the History of Patriarchs. So like one of the miracles, the one we mentioned there between, we briefly mentioned it, the icon showing them together with the holy bread, that event or miracle, we say, is not in the History of Patriarchs. So some manuscripts like that and some other secondary sources showing different stories, different events and different arguments, how they were together. But it's not just those two. Like we mentioned, the other two personages, Ibrahim Fani and Abba Marco Solontoni. So if you look to those like manuscript material, for example, the hagiographies, it also shows some connections between all 4 personages in different ways.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Because there is some overlap.
Thanks, Brent. Any other questions, comments?
Yes. Just thinking in terms of intergenerational mentoring, accountability, discipleship, whichever liturgy you come from, what would be, in your opinion, the benefit to other versions or denominations of churches to adopt this kind of close circle of prayer intercession across age barriers.
Can you ask the question one more time, please?
I beg your pardon?
Can you repeat the question one more time, please?
Okay. From a differing background denomination, what would be the benefit to other churches of adopting an intergenerational or multi-generational close circle of prayer partners, mentors, interserving each other? Because it's an unusual structure I've only seen so far in Greek Orthodoxy and obviously Coptic. And I'm wondering how it could benefit other forms of Christianity and leadership.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to respond. I guess, I mean, with intercession, it is a whole topic, and if different churches are not big on intercession of saints, it may be a bit difficult to apply. But one thing I could say is that we, like as the Coptic Church, we don't like worship the saints. There's a big difference in worship. We venerate the saints. So sometimes we have this like misconception. Like I remember, in the Coptic Church, there's like it's called like a Coptic New Year, where it's we venerate the relics of the saints, and one day of the year. And I remember like our bishop. So we have a bishop that lives in the monastery, and we had a group of school students coming to visit the monastery, and the Coptic Orthodox school. Like there's three Coptic schools in Sydney, but not all the students in the Coptic school are Copts. You get a mix of non-Copts. So remember the bishop saying, he's like, look, we don't worship these saints. We venerate them. So we can try to imitate some aspects of their life. We don't say like they are God. And so I remember the bishop trying to make this clarification to the non-Copts. So for us, for non-Copts or non-believers in intercession of saints, you can always apply aspects of their lives, like spiritual aspects of their life. I aim to apply them. And that form, I guess, is a form of intercession. And even, quote unquote, asking for their intercession, asking for their help. And for example, like Saint Anthony the Great, he's well known to around the world to people that don't have necessarily a background in saints. And people can apply aspects of their life in one way. And you can read the stories.
All right, that might be a good time to wrap things up, unless there's one final quick question or comment.
I have one question.
Yeah, go for it, Christina.
I really found this really fascinating. Please forgive me for my ignorance, but so you've shown the influence of these four male figures, so church fathers. Were there any church mothers that were influencing him?
Yeah. Matthew, like his mother's in his hagiography, and it talks about how she prophesied that he would become someone great in the church. I put that notes in my second talk or first talk, but I didn't show the whole thing. But that's in his hagiography, and like I even used that the History of Patriarchs uses that parallel to show it's kind of like the story of the Virgin Mary and the angel coming. It's something prophetic. So he'll become someone great. So, but the answer, there are lots of church mothers in the Coptic Orthodox Church. Not so much with Pope Matthew at his time, but we do have, like we call like the Desert Fathers and mothers. and we have the many church mothers, but there's not as many, of course.
All right. Thanks for that question, Christina. Thanks very much, Father John, for another really interesting presentation. Thanks everyone for participating in our first research seminar for the year, and especially to our three presenters. Our next seminar is on Thursday, April 10th. And while most of our program for the year is already pretty much fully booked, that date is still has 2 spots to be filled. So I will